Fabulous. So hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today on a Black man's perspective. My name is Nisa Ford, and I'm the proud chair of TAMS D&I committee. We would like to thank you all for joining us today on this special occasion, as this is the first time TAMS is collaborating with GBTA on a matter so close to all our hearts. So a special mention to TAMS D&I committee and the Greater DC Metro of GBTA, two independent association amplifying one voice, because we are better together. Now, on to some housekeeping rules before we get started. Now, all attendees' mics are on mute without video, but please do submit all your questions via Q&A and any comments you have via the chat. We would love to hear from you as your input is invaluable to us. You will be delighted to know that this session is recorded, so you can literally have it on repeat and watch it over and over again. Now on to the exciting part, and without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator today, Carmen Smith from ICF. And with that, I hope you'll enjoy this insightful session. Carmen, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and we are so glad to be here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day just to hear what we have to say, but I really am excited, and as Nisa said, we're going to be talking about Black History Month in Europe. And you're like, why Black History Month in October? Well, 50 years from the time that the US started Black History Month, which is in February, as most of you are familiar with, we now have Black History Month in October. And that started with a festival that took place there and bringing about the contributions of Black folks around the world. And there it began in Europe. And our guests today are going to talk about their perspectives on that topic of hand. But in the meantime, I'd like to start off with a poll question. And if you can bring that poll up, we'd like you to participate and answer. The question is it surprising to see a Black man in the boardroom? Do you agree, somewhat agree, disagree, or somewhat disagree? Okay, and as we'll talk about these results a little bit later, but this is real interesting to see. Okay, and we'll have that conversation. At this time, I would like to bring my panelists on. That's Ranga Chiliwanika. We've got Paul Coverdale and Wayne Robinson. And at this time, I am going to ask, we'll start with Ranga, but ask each of the gentlemen to just do a brief introduction of themselves and their role in the industry.
Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, everyone, for having me here. My name is Ranga. I work for a company called Accor, which is a global hospitality chain. And I'm a director of global sales for Accor. And I am based just outside DC in Arlington, Virginia.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Coverdale. I'm the director for partner analytics at Internova Travel Group, where my main focus is to bring commercial value to all of our supplier data. I'm based in New York City, and I appreciate being invited for today's discussion.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wayne Robinson. I'm Vice President of Events and Multimedia for FM Global Commercial Property Insurance Company, based in 38 countries. My department is responsible for about 130 or so corporately sponsored meetings globally in both the events and multimedia, to include graphics, presentations, and things of that nature, as well as social media. And really appreciated being invited to this esteemed panel.
Sorry about that, I'm on mute. I'm so excited to have each of you gentlemen. Honestly, this is a topic that I'm really, really excited about. But I want to talk about just briefly, as many of you know, that the US civil rights movement has stemmed from a series of events, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the sit-in at the Woolworth Center counters, Selma, and other events. And so Dr. Martin Luther King became that face of the civil rights movement. So my first question is to you, Ranga. Growing up in the United Kingdom, Great Britain in particular, do you remember a formalized civil rights movement in Europe? And then also second to that, what has been some of your greatest memories about the celebration of Black History Month in Europe?
Okay, two very important questions there. I think going on your first question about civil rights movement in the UK, I think although it's not as well documented as US civil rights movements, it's still a very important part of British history. And there have been great strides to bring about equality in Britain, which should be acknowledged and celebrated. You mentioned the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks. I think the UK had similar type of activity, just marked in very different ways. The first, I think, what comes to mind in particular would be a youth worker in Bristol in 1963 called Paul Stevenson, who decided to take a stand against the Bristol Omnibus Company, which really refused to employ Black and South Asian people, despite there being a mist of skill shortage. This boycott that Paul Stevenson led and organized lasted almost 4 months, and eventually the Bristol Omnibus Company backed down by changing its policy, which was a huge achievement for Stevenson and Black people in Britain at the time. It really overturned the color bar, but more importantly, it paved the way for the Race Relations Act of 1965. And I think there are more and more examples of that really correlate to the civil rights movement here in the US as well. And then the second question you asked me about, what was the second question again, Carmen?
So the second question was, and let me just talk real quickly before I reiterate that question, but it's good to know, and thank you for highlighting those events, because, us in the US, we have our history, it's very familiar to us. And so this is just to let folks know, even on here, that people of color have challenges globally, depending on where they are. And so thank you for, and it kind of sounds like it all started with a bus boycott, similar incidences. But my other question to you was, were there anything that stuck out or any highlight that you can remember growing up about the celebration of Black history in Europe that stood out to you?
So I might have a little, I don't know. I think Black History Month in the UK and Europe in general, I think really stemmed more recently than it has over in the US. But I do love Black History Month. I love the fact that, we acknowledge this month and celebrate this month. It's honoring challenges so many Black men and women faced and educating society on the challenges they still face and celebrating the challenges they've overcome. But I wouldn't say I highlight something that's specific to Black History Month, but one thing I do love, which happens at the end of August every year in London, is called the last weekend in August, and it's called the Notting Hill Carnival. Many people aren't aware that it was born out of racial tensions in the 1950s and 1960s. Race relations between the police and Black people led to riots in 1958. And the following year, Claudia Jones hosted an event in Camden to showcase the richness of Caribbean culture. And it really put an emphasis back on the celebration of Black culture. And today, Notting Hill Carnival has been hailed as Europe's largest street festival with millions of people that attend throughout the 2 days.
Wow, listen, that gives me another excuse to come to the UK, which I love. So maybe I'll come at the end of August, and maybe you and your family can meet me over there and you can show me around. So thank you for that. Now, at the beginning, we did talk about, we had a poll that came up, which was, the results were really interesting. So it said 19% agreed whether Black men, are they surprised to see Black men in the boardroom? So 19% of you said you agree. Oh, thank you for showing that. 38% said they somewhat agree. 23% said they disagree. And then 19% said they somewhat disagree. So I guess some of you, or the majority of you, are a little bit surprised. So we're going to talk about that because we're going to make a shift now. We talked about some of the civil rights movement and the history of Europe and US and naming some highlights. But now I want to take this conversation to our present day, your roles in travel, in industry, and look at that. And Ranga, I want to talk to you because you have started what's called the Black Men's Travel Network. And I want to talk to you and ask, why did you start that? What did you see the need for? Clearly there was a need. And based on this poll, there are some folks that were somewhat surprised to find Black men in boardrooms. And so can you talk to us a little bit about the Black Men's Travel Network and its origins?
Yeah, sure. I can definitely talk to you about the origins. I think throughout my career as a Black man in travel, I became very used to being one of the only, if not the only Black man in the room. I never had anyone who went through similar experiences or someone I could consult and exchange views with who looked like me. I was looking for something like this, but it just wasn't there. And I think the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd really gave me that push to start something myself. I still have amazing colleagues that were calling me, throughout those events to see how I was doing, if I was okay. But I was very reluctant to speak from the heart because I didn't want to come across as that angry Black guy at work. Yes, I was angry. I just couldn't show it. Growing up in England, my experience as a Black man is very different to a Black American man. Same as I'm sure, Paul, you could say growing up in New York is different to someone who grew up in LA. I created the group really to be a safe space for Black men to come together, bounce ideas off one another, share experiences, and mentor one another, really. And I think Paul can speak to more about, where we've taken it since it was created.
Yeah, thanks, Ranga. So as Ranga mentioned, there was a need to create the Black Men's Travel Network. There was COVID, there was the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and many of us found that we were, let's say, furloughed, right? We're still in the travel industry, which was hit really hard, and so there was a lot for us to talk about, right? And like Ranga said, finding that safe space to do so really allowed us to look within and say, hey, we do have a network and a strong brotherhood of Black men within the industry that can use the same sort of group, right? And so in there, we work through our pillars of excellence, networking, brotherhood, recruitment, and influence, and mentorship and development. And as Wayne knows, our group has grown to about, I think, 90 plus. Maybe I think we're at about 100 people right now, and these men are in the industry all across all different categories, different experience levels. We have sales, entry level people to directors, and I think GMs of hotels are probably our highest ranked officially. So it's created a great opportunity for not just that safe space for us, but then also to create a strong network of Black men within the travel industry.
Awesome, thank you so much. In the US, we have some, and if you can present the slide that we have some statistics, and I do see some questions. So I'm not going to ignore you. I want to make sure we get through this conversation, and we'll definitely get to these, because I think that these questions are really important. So just know that we do see these. We will make sure that we take time to answer those questions and talk about that. But we do have some statistics, and this is just in the US alone here, but there are some, and this kind of goes to our question, are you surprised about a Black man in the boardroom? Well, there's a reason for that for some of you. There's less than 1% Black CEOs and presidents. We're talking about the value of diversity here and what DE&I is going to talk about, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But there's 1.5% Black executives, 19% of hospitality workers are Black, but less than 5% of those executives have executive level positions or are filled by people of color. Black US leisure travelers spent $109 billion on travel in 2019. And I want to stop there for a minute because and this is dealing with travel. So just, we're talking about, I guess this is actually over and above. And so that was one of the reasons that Ranga and his team started the Black Men's Network, because as you can see, this is across the board, whether it's travel or other industries, there's less than 1% Black CEOs and presidents. But also there's a premise that Black folks don't travel, or people of color don't travel. I used to own an agency years ago, and was one of the reasons that I started that agency is because there was a premise that folks didn't feel comfortable going into white agencies because they were often thought about as like, why are you here? And as this statistics show, we're traveling. In fact, I'm getting ready to leave on a plane on Sunday to go over to Europe, to Lisbon and to Barcelona. So we do travel, we travel a lot. And so there's also a tying-in article that was sent over to me this morning about multicultural folks in Europe. And multi-ethnic groups tend to travel more than their white counterparts in Europe going overseas, but they also look at it where they're going. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we continue to talk about DE&I. But the places that they go make a difference. Where are they included? Where will they be accepted? And so those are some of the topics that we're going to continue to talk about with these gentlemen today. But S&P also has a survey that says businesses with executive boards that are made up of over 30% of color experience a 4% increase in revenue. And then also businesses with less than 20% saw a decrease in revenue. And as we all know, diversity in and of itself, whether it's diversity of thought, diversity of mindset, diversity of people, diversity of languages, it brings different perspectives to this conversation. And it's the reason that I was so excited about bringing a Black man's perspective to this and talking about this topic within the travel industry specifically, but also within corporate America in general. And, me as a Black woman, I can't I can't sit here and make a presumption that because I'm Black, I understand how Black men think. I'm married to a Black man, but that doesn't mean I always understand what he's thinking. And I didn't want to have the presumption that I understood how these gentlemen think and what they're thinking about within this industry. So as we talk about this, each of you have different roles and positions within the industry. Ranga, you're in hotel. Paul, you're within the TMC realm, and Wayne, you're a buyer in the meetings and event space. So I'd like to know, and let's just talk about DE&I real quickly before I ask you this question. So for those of you who don't know, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And let me just say this to you. The equity in that, I know I see a lot of people post D&I and diversity and inclusion, but the diversity, equity, inclusion is very, very important. That equity piece is a component as to why things work and why this conversation is necessary. And as someone so eloquently talked about it at GBTA this past summer, equity is the invitation to the dance, but inclusion is the asking of the dance. Not somebody just sitting on the wall, but somebody going over and actually participating and asking you to be a part of it and asking you to be a part of either the decision making. And so please, when you're writing about diversity, equity, inclusion, please include that E in there, DE&I, and not just D&I. So getting back to Ranga, Wayne, and Paul, they're coming from different perspectives, not only in lifestyle, but also where they are in the industry. And Wayne, I'm going to start this question with you. What does DE&I mean to you? And then Paul and Ranga, you can step in, but I'd like to hear from you, Wayne.
Sure, Carmen. It's interesting because, how many, I go back, I'm probably the oldest person, I might be the oldest person on our panel. And I remember affirmative action back in the 70s. And, that was going to right the many wrongs with school busing and all of these other things and what have you. And we all know how that worked out. And now all of a sudden, after post George Floyd, there's this push on DE&I. And I'm on LinkedIn quite frequently, and I look and I see so many people hired within that, whether it be DE&I realm or ESG or sustainability or what have you. And sustainability coming about after we realize that climate change is real and the world is changing. But specifically DE&I, what comes to mind to me is how it's used, and people really people fully understand exactly what that means. And a lot of people associate that with racial inequity based upon what happened with George Floyd when we were in a pandemic and nobody could ignore exactly what was going on or find any reasons or excuses to explain it all. So all of a sudden the world changed. And it's like, okay, now DE&I exploded. Because remember, we used to talk about diversity and inclusion. It was D&I, then we included DE&I. Now, what the DE&I stands for is not specific to Black folks in general, but it's specific to all people who have been, systematically declined opportunities. But obviously, gas on the fire was after the George Floyd. So what I look at it from a corporate perspective, every board for every major Fortune 500 company, whether public or privately held, has that on their objectives. DE&I, hire more people of color, hire more women, promote people into positions and what have you. Now, is this actually happening? You have to go on a case-by-case basis. From what I see, it's great. It looks good on paper. We all sign a code of conduct. We all basically are involved in changing things, but actually is anything changing? I can't say that for other companies and other industries, but I see it very slow. Here I am out at IMEX, which is, I think, in the US, the largest travel trade show. Normally it's about 10,000 people. It might be a little less this year. I'm in Vegas right now. And I walked that floor yesterday. I saw very few people of color. I did see people in sales roles, and I did see people in, various other roles and what have you. And I actually see more now than I've seen in the past, but I don't see a lot of people. Now here we are in the heart of DE&I and it's heart of this initiative that we all have, including our industry, travel, hospitality. And I don't see a lot of people that look like me walking that floor or involved in these various companies and what have you. And these are large multinational companies, and it's still very few, if any. I see more representation from destinations that really are basically primarily people of color, and that mean the Caribbean, or in some instances I see from Latin America or other countries or what have you that are represented. But I don't see from the executive level, I see very little change.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, Wayne, because that brings up the perception versus reality, right? So, DE&I for me means changing the perception that there's no Black talent, right? Or no good minority talent, or changing the misconception that a Black man can't be successful or as successful as his white counterpart, right? I mean, all of it is, we say, the E is in equity, but it's also in exposure, right? Exposure leading to intelligence or the perceived notion of intelligence, right? How often do we, know someone that we perceive to be super smart and intelligent, and then we realize, okay, they're able to sound this way because of the experiences that they've had in life, not necessarily because they're book smart or actually, fundamentally intelligent. So it's kind of like, how do we support good minority talent, bring folks like us into the industry, cultivate them, right? Ensure that their talent isn't going to go to the wayside, and that they're not going to be forced or confronted with biases that will lead to their stagnation in their careers, right? Having a wider range of these ideas and a wider range of bodies and more diverse thought leads to more ROI, like we saw in the other slides. So, there's obviously a positive benefit in DE&I from a humanities perspective and socially, but there's still, of course, that ROI as well.
Yeah, and off the back of that, thanks, Paul. DEI to me, I think in its simplest form is simply representation, right? The world as we see it right now has changed so much just in the past few decades. People, age, race, gender identity. And ultimately, I think, not just our industry, but all industries should be more representative and thoughtful about that and more reflective of what the world has become.
Well, you guys can see why I'm so excited about these gentlemen being on my panel. Such great insight. And you guys said some things that were really, really important. I heard disenfranchisement. I heard perception and misconception, or even misperception. I'm of the age of Wayne, where affirmative action was the thing of the day back then. And it has to go beyond just being a quota. DE&I has to be about not just checking a box, but really putting your money where your mouth is and really practicing what you preach when a company says that. And let me just say this, and I do preach it from the hilltop. My company has had the unique experience of being founded by a Black man. In 1969, a Tuskegee Airman, and I think it was Paul that talked about the misconception about whether we're capable of doing anything. And so for those of you who don't know who the Tuskegee Airmen, they were a group of men, pilots. Most of them, I think all of them actually, were bachelor degree men, but it was an sorry, I can't talk right now. It was an experiment by our US government to prove that Blacks were not qualified to be pilots. Long story short, these men more than capably proved themselves. But it was during World War II, the bombardiers were to be escorted by other men, white soldiers, and they ended up not showing up on time. They ended up being mediocre in their thought and approach, and just by happenstance, because remember, I think you just talked about exposure and you talked about access. We weren't exposed, and so we weren't on the channels during that time of knowing, okay, that the enemy isn't bound because they didn't have that access. But just by chance, these men were flying, and I don't know if you've seen Red Tails or even seen Tuskegee Airmen by HBO, but they just happened to be flying and see a friendly bombardier. And as a result, they proved themselves in that moment. And so, we were taught to be prepared, be better than, be experienced and exposed. And so therefore they had that opportunity of escorting that bombardier to that target point, allowing them to drop the bombs in Germany at the time, and then safely escorting those men back. And so long story short, during that time period, they never lost one plane that they were escorting during that time. You talk about excellence. Now, it didn't mean they didn't lose their lives. It didn't mean that there wasn't sacrifices made, but they were successfully done. But even with all of that, and you guys talked about George Floyd, you talked about the prevalence, now we've known there's a movie called Till. Emmett Till was from the North. He happened to come down to the South. And as the story goes, he was blamed for something that he didn't do. And this has been a story of just Black folks in general. People of color can tell it. The Native Americans have their stories, and others have their stories. But George Floyd brought to the forefront what things have been doing to Black folks all along. And thank God, we have videos and cameras and things like that. So now things are believable. And so, just the stories that you're telling, it's why this is so important and why D&I is so important, because there is a misconception that we're incapable. There's a misconception that we can't do or we're not smart enough. Look at, I'm a sports fan. They didn't have Black quarterbacks back in the day because they didn't think that Black men were capable or smart enough of being quarterbacks. And I could go on and on. I won't do that, but thank you for that insight on that. Now, leading and continuing on in the discussion of DE&I want to ask you, thinking about your respective industries, how do you see yourselves? And I know that Wayne, you touched on this a little bit because you're at IMEX right now. But about your different industries, from the hotel side to, GBTA. So when you go to these conferences and events within your space, GBTA, MPI, BTN, are you ever invited to be panelists as SMEs, subject matter experts? Are you guys board members or on other decision-making platforms? Or do you see other men of color in those positions? And if not, what are your thoughts? Paul, I'd like to start with you.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I myself, I'm actually at a conference as well down in DC. I'd like to say, I think first off, for myself, I'm very lucky to have the Black Men's Travel Network. I was very lucky in the past to work with GBTA ladders, and so going to these conferences has we've been able to build our own network to bring there, right? That doesn't sugarcoat the fact that there's not a lot of representation, right? We're often invited as subject matter experts, but not by the, let's call it the old guard, right? We're really invited by an opportunity that comes through in our personal networks, in our professional networks, right? Even being able and having the privilege to speak on this panel came up, through your knowing Ranga and Ranga knowing us, right? And not to discount any of that, but certainly it makes it a little more difficult to be on those larger panels and to be invited on those boards. I think it's worth mentioning that although there's a lot of DE&I work going on at the moment, and certainly we're on a good trajectory or a better trajectory than in the past, I find it ironic that us men of color and minorities are asked more so to be on boards for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not as SMEs or not on an SME board within the industry. So it's almost, it's relying on the fact that, yes, of course, we're SMEs for, being Black people in America or Europe or, in the world, but it still discredits that we are subject matter experts within our own industry. So that, there needs to be a changing or a closing of that gap, I'd say.
That's an important point that you make, because one of the things, travel just in general, people that travel heavily on a personal level tend to be more open-minded, and they tend to be more tolerant, and some of us are multilingual. But when it comes to corporate America and travel within corporate America, it doesn't seem to translate. It seems to take on the mindset of that corporation or of that. And so that's real important that you made that. And then bringing along young folks, being called upon for who we are. Because we're in the industry because of our expertise. We're doing the things that we're doing because of our expertise, not because of the color of our skin. Ranga, can you talk to that same question?
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said, right? And I'm being specific because I know there are people here that that don't work in our industry, in the travel industry, but being specific to travel industry, I think it's always been implied, that there aren't these issues of racism, sexism, otherisms, that they don't occur at our firms, at our industry. Because our industry is all about connecting people, right? Where in fact, we know they do, biases, racism, sexism, ageism, this all occurs in our industry. And it's the same when what Paul touched upon about going to these conferences, these events, and I've seen very few people that look like me. And when you do, it would be the customary head nod, but you wouldn't know. You'd be like, who does that person work for? What do they do? And that was the beauty of the Black Men's Travel Network, is now we know one another. We can call upon one another. When I need something, when I need an analytical mind, I can pick up the phone and be like, Paul, I need your help with this, and I have him to help me and to figure things out with me. So in answer to your question about, do I see more people on panels? I would love to see it. I think we're going in that direction, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But we're certainly, hopefully, headed in the right direction.
And Ranga mentioned bias, and you know, that plays such a huge role. I know I'm jumping off script here, but you know, a lot of times I think, and Ranga could probably, you know, second this, we are assumed to be younger than we are, or we're the young guys, right? We're new, you know, and regardless of the fact that we have 15 plus years in the industry, regardless of the fact that, you know, we're directors within large corporations, and that in itself is used as a subtle or an unconscious bias that supports racism and stagnation, or systematic racism and stagnation within industries, right? So you know, it's not just the tangible, the really like, we're pushing forward and we're going to have these initiatives and we're going to do these things. It's those subtleties that say, hey, maybe I need to check myself and not think that way, right? But even back to the polling question of, you know, when you see a Black man in the boardroom, are you surprised? Are you even more surprised when you see a Black man that doesn't look like he's, you know, elderly, let's say at this point, or, you know, or when you see someone like Ranga and myself in a boardroom, and you know, we're not that young of men, right, at this point. So, you know, it's those subtle biases that kind of work within, but then support, you know, racism and stagnation within any industry.
Those are good points too, because again, somebody mentioned ageism, you know, and talking and just making that assumption. Wayne, you're a buyer in the industry, but you're also in the meetings and event space, which is, I would say, travel adjacent, because what most people don't understand is that travel and meetings they're really two different industries, and though they overlap in some ways, there really is a different focus within that industry. So, and I know you're at IMEX right now, but I know you're a member of MPI and others. Can you talk from that perspective as well?
Absolutely, Carmen. I had the honor of serving on MPI executive planning boards. I've served on the Ritz-Carlton advisory board. I was a board member of FICP, and I served as chair in 2019 for that association. Obviously, a lot of this came along to Paul's point. It came a little later in my career, these opportunities. Yes, am I asked to be on boards, or am I asked to participate in various industry-related functions, activities, or what have you, or be commented? Yes, but what happens is, you know, I've been in this industry for a long period of time, so some of these opportunities have presented themselves. When I look at Paul and I look at Ranga, they're much younger, and they have experience and they've been in the industry for a while, but you know, there's perception that, well, maybe they're not as experienced as some of their white counterparts. And that is very common, because quite honestly, when you go into, let's look at hospitality, for example, the majority, if you say 19%, I think that poll said 19% of the people are people of color, but the majority of those people are behind the scenes, or they're not working, or it could be even front desk or early administration. It's not your most senior people. I mean, I go to hotels all the time. You don't see people that look like me who are going to come out and greet you as DOS, or you know, or even, you know, senior salespeople. It just doesn't happen. So I think what happens is, and this is rightfully, you know, there's a level of experience that comes with experience. And if you don't have that opportunity early on in your career to grow, to diversify, to move, to have these other, especially in the hospitality industry, and even on the corporate event side, you really have to move around. You have to have certain different roles. And if you don't have those opportunities, you never get to the point where you will even be considered to sit around the table. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So we might see people in certain areas and bring in lower level positions, but to get to that next level, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice on their part, and somebody's going to have to provide a lifeline to get there. That doesn't come natural for us. It's very difficult, and that hasn't changed at all. So do I see abject racism in your face? Absolutely not. But if you take a look at the experience levels, and that's on paper and it's in black and white, if you look at all these various, I won't call them barriers, but you look at these various obstacles to get to that next level, therein lies behind the curtain where the most difficult areas for growth are right now. in terms of DE&I and advancement.
And that is important. I know we're getting close to time, and I do want to make sure that we do have some questions in the chat, but I do want to ask a couple more questions, and if we can just be succinct and brief in our answers, but still I still want the answer. So, and I'm going to go to you, Ranga. What would you tell your younger self, given what you know now about your experiences in particular? And then what would you have done differently, if anything?
I would tell my younger self to step out of the comfort zone much earlier, much sooner. I think me moving to New York from London and now settling down in the US was a huge, steep learning curve at such a, I looked like a spring chicken, but I wasn't, I still wasn't then. I wasn't young like that, but I think I would have done that a lot earlier, or moved, to the Middle East or China, just really step out of my comfort zone and get out there, see the world much sooner. That's what I would tell myself. What would I change? I don't think I'd change anything. I think every experience I've had has helped me get to this point.
Awesome. Paul, same question.
Yeah, I tell myself to pay more attention in history class, and that I would end up going to see all these places. No, I think really it continues the same theme of exposure, and having that understanding that if you've grown up in a family that travels, or if you have the means to travel and you go to school, then you're going to pay more attention to history class, because you might say, hey, I'm going to go to Paris next year or next week or whatever. But a lot of minority families don't have that. So I would say really use that as an opportunity to expand and expand the ability for exposure later on in life. And I think the travel industry has a unique opportunity to support that. What would I change? I don't think I would change anything. Like Ranga, I think we're perfect in the way we are. But no, I think honestly, reaching out of your comfort zone as an adult is one of the biggest pieces. I think we can create whatever level of comfort we need to survive, but the real optimization opportunity is bringing yourself to that break, right, and breaking through it, and then creating a new level of comfort. So
Also, Wayne.
I think they summed it up pretty well when you say step out of your comfort zone. I didn't have a sense of belonging, quite honestly. I was afraid to be wrong, to say the wrong answer, or maybe to be viewed as, well, man, that wasn't very smart of you, or what have you, and that would be a hindrance to my growth. If I had to do it all over again, I would tell my younger self to say, step out of your comfort zone, just like the gentleman said. And just say, hey, listen, I may be wrong, but this is how I feel, and this is where I think it'll move the needle, whether it be something simple or complex, it doesn't matter. But stand up, raise your hand. And I see a lot of that and a reluctance in that, especially in young men of color, to say, hey, listen, I don't want to be wrong, because then I'll be perceived. There's a perception. So therefore, I may not, I don't want to be wrong, so maybe not do that. So it took me a lot longer to realize that, there's no such thing as a wrong answer. But you might add it, because even if you're wrong, you're still going to learn something from the right answer. But you'll never know if you never raise your hand and step to the forefront. But if I had to do it all over again, step to the forefront, raise your hand and say, listen, this is how I feel, or this is how I feel I'll move the needle.
Oh, those are great questions. Thank you so much. I was thinking about that too, because I think Ranga mentioned something earlier in our conversation about not wanting to be the angry Black man. Well, I all day long, the angry Black woman. And I think sometimes when we do speak up, we're not in safe environments, or we're misunderstood. You're talking about misconceptions. You're passionate about things. You have a point of view about things, but it's often discounted. And it's like, why are you angry? But that leads me to my last question for you guys, and then give us, we got a couple of minutes that we can leave time for the audience to ask some questions here. But just talking about that, I want to ask this question of you guys, because I think it's important. given the assumption, and we've all talked about it within the context of this conversation, but given the assumption of the existence of biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, are there any final thoughts that today you'd like to, leave with the audience here, which could compel them to either become better allies or others to become better agents of change, and helping them to improve the landscape of inside travel or in corporate America in general? And Paul, I think I'm going to start with you, Wayne, and then go Paul, and then Ranga, finish up with Ranga, because there's some questions that people want to ask Ranga in general.
Absolutely. Well, I'll be very brief, Carmen. Biases run deep. I mean, where do they come from? It could be from upbringing. It could be from experience. It's so many different things that create bias, and that is not based on race. Bias is something that we all have. It's innate. It's in all of us. And I feel that to overcome that is to really kind of spend time with, I say it's almost like that concept where if you're afraid of snakes, and there's a whole thing, a whole methodology around, okay, I'm going to hand you a snake to relieve that fear. If you're afraid or you have a bias toward whether it be people or anything, run towards that, because something, feel comfortable enough. If it's bias or a racial bias or something, I want to have a conversation with somebody. After George Floyd was killed, I had 45 amazing conversations with people I've known in some instances 20 years or more. And I didn't realize the biases, or I didn't realize their true thoughts or feelings, but they felt comfortable enough to approach me, and they used that subject in order to open that conversation. Take advantage of those opportunities, both incoming as well as if you have questions to ask of other people. Never make an assumption.
Yeah, those are great points. And to add on that, be intentional, right? Take intentional action. Be intentional in the way you speak with people, the way you work with people. Be intentional in how you address yourself. And in doing so, we could only hope that that creates positive influence out here in the world, but be intentional.
I think for me, my final thoughts is, one of the biggest misconceptions we see is that the emphasis on Black history is divisive, and some mistakenly label it racist. But if we continue to emphasize that people of all colors all work towards human rights and these common goals, then everyone can see themselves as part of a larger mission. And those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. And I have some questions here, but I also want to just take the time that I didn't get to do in the beginning, but not only to my TAMS community, but also to my local chapter of the Greater DC Metro chapter of GBTA, and how we've come together. You're talking about networking. I think Paul brought that up too, and we talked about just having that exposure. Well, I just happen to be the director of DE&I for our local chapter, but also I'm a member of TAMS on the DE&I strand, which is how Ranga and I met. And we've been, trying to do work within the community to bring people about. And so we talk about allies, those of you who are non-people of color, being allies. We can't do this by ourselves, getting there, being, I am where I am because somebody saw the value in me. They decided, hey, let me talk to Carmen about not only her expertise, not just DE&I, but she has something to say. And I think that's going to be important. Ranga, there was a couple of questions. One was at the beginning related to you. Can Ranga speak to the struggles of brown people being brought to the UK? They have similar struggles to the US Black experience, specifically those who came to the UK and don't have citizen papers. I know it's a heavy question, but
so it is like the dreamers, right? I think like I said, there's so many parallels between the US and the UK. I can't speak specifically about that subject because when it was all highlighted was just a few years ago. I was already here. And I was just hearing through my friends, hey, this is happening. People have been here all their lives and they're being told they don't have citizenship. They have to go back to where they came from, which is, they're British. So, and it's it's something you'd never see a person who isn't of color having to go through, you know, and it's really tough. And like you said, Carmen, we need allies. We need people to all fight together against injustices like that. And that's the only way we'll change the world.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just looking to see, are there any other questions here? But I want to just again say thank you to this. Let me say, just having your perspectives. Not only are you diverse in probably age and experience, but also diverse in just in the type of parts you play in the industry. Ranga, did you want to say something else?
You can wrap up, and then I'll say what I wanted to say. I basically want to say thank you so much. We appreciate you. For those that are still on the call, Carmen is headed out to Europe because it is a huge birthday. She's celebrating very soon. Many people know, but I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday, and I'm sure everyone here wants to wish you a happy birthday.
Well, thank you very much. So just full disclosure, my birthday was actually September. However, due to scheduling and all of those wonderful things, we are headed to Europe, and it is in celebration of my 60th birthday. Ironically, that is also the date of my wedding anniversary, not planned. So even though it's birthday, I will be also celebrating my 22nd wedding anniversary as well. But thank you guys. And again, as we wrap up, thank you everyone. I see you in the chat too. But thank you for those, because it looks like the folks that came on, everybody stayed on the call, and I'm so glad that this is being recorded. I know I got a couple of emails that folks, something came up at the last and they couldn't be on here. But I think this is an important conversation that everyone needs to listen to. I hope that it was thought-provoking. My intent was for people not only to just have a different maybe perspective. We talked about biases, we talked about misconceptions, but these are three very educated, very accomplished Black men with great personalities. I'm telling you, these are like my besties. I'm just want y'all to know you ain't gonna get rid of me now, because now that I know who you are, I can't be part of the Black Men's Network, but I'm gonna be calling on you for different stuff. And I just want to say thank you to Nisa. I want to say thank you to Debbie Thomas, and I think who else is on here? Tanya Jacobson. These are my GBTA folks. But I just want to say thank you also behind the scenes to Shari Ivarone, who is she's with All Tours, and just being able to just really be that production behind the scenes. And I just really want to say thank you all for taking your time this afternoon, joining us. And again, I hope this conversation has been thought-provoking, that it will help you to become better allies, take time to understand people, just anybody that's different than you. And somebody mentioned in the chat before, it's cliquish. Travel can be cliquish. We tend to bring in people that, the good old boy, good old girl, whatever network it is, but we need to reach out and play in different sandboxes, as I say, because you will find some treasures that you didn't know were available to you just by reaching across. And so again, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the Black History Month in Europe, and enjoy that. And again, thank you, TAMS. Thank you, GBTA. I really appreciate Ranga, Paul, Wayne. Thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you, Carmen. Stay well.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you, Carmen.
You all take care. Thank you.